Have you ever been asked to summarise your life in just one word? In the 90s, when I was a member of the General Committee of the Asian Church Women's Conference, at one of our assemblies we were given a triangle of cloth and asked to write or illustrate on that triangle something that expressed our being. I hate anything like that. Oh, it's awful. You have to think. I pondered for ages on what I was going to put on it and eventually came up with the one word, service. I fulfilled the assignment and went with all the others to make a huge wall hanging. Done. And a few years later I was asked to go to Kenya and I said, I can do that. I can serve there as well as anywhere. And so today I want to tell you some of the stories that fit in with our theme, making a world of difference in service. And commence with a story about service from a country town in Kenya called Gilgil. Well, they would call it Gilgil, but its real name is Gilgil. It was Easter Sunday in Gilgil and the hall was packed. I arrived early and signed the ubiquitous guest book. The officer took me to her quarters, which was on the same plot as the hall. And while we waited for the open air meeting group to return to the hall, she took me to the quarters. And as we approached each room, she said to me, "This is your sitting room. This is your kitchen. This is your bedroom." As you can see, it has no refinements at all. All her clothes are hung on hooks around the small room because there's no other furniture beside the bed. But the little she had, she willingly offered it to me for the time of my visit. We think about the service we give in money and personnel from Australia and other first world countries, but we seldom think of the service given by the locals in remote parts. I'm sorry to say I cannot remember the officer's name, but I do remember her grace, her kindness and her service, not only to me, but to her poor folk. I guess you may not remember a special drought in Africa appeal that the Australia Southern Territory held in 2001. The drought was terrible. The people who rely for meagre meals on their ability to grow corn and a few vegetables, it was dire. The Salvation Army's feeding program in Kenya brought relief to more than 100,000 people during the drought. The money that was given in the appeal that you took part in went to provide a daily meal for 50,000 young children. What you collectively gave on that day continued to provide assistance in ways you would never have imagined. Immediately after the feeding program began, children began to return to school. Before, they were too weak to attend. And then we started receiving letters from school principals and teachers saying that because the children had food in their bellies, they were not going to sleep at the desk and were more attentive. The exam results were higher than they had been. You served by giving, we served by distributing. That program continued long after the official drought subsided, and it made a world of difference. Africa, including Kenya, has been hit very badly with HIV/AIDS. It's often been described as the modern equivalent to leprosy in biblical times. Whole villages have been smitten. The age group it affects is mainly 18 to 40, and so it takes school teachers, policemen, professional people, people who are child bearers and child rearers. And because they are among the 600 people per day who are dying of AIDS, you find that grandparents have multiple numbers of their grandchildren to bring up, and all of this without pension or a financial help. It means they only have the food that they can grow. The children cannot go to school because because they do not have cash, and medical attention is minimal. It's devastating. I have to say that now that the national government has changed, school attendance is now free, but it was not when I was there. If you turn up at a hospital with a broken arm, you will not be admitted until the fee has been paid up front. The Salvation Army has a wonderful program of education and treatment of HIV/AIDS. It's very simple and with no recriminations. It's a program of the Women's Ministry Department, and it goes like this. The Divisional Director of Women's Ministry and a couple of people, a nurse, school teacher or someone with credibility in the community, in her division or district, come to Nairobi for training. The training is not in medical matters, but in conducting a community information meeting. Those trained moved into the community in their division and first of all meet the chief of the village. They ask if they can call a meeting, which may be under a tree or another convenient place, and talk about the subject. The questions are very simple and ask such things as, there's a terrible disease happening in our community. Does anyone know what it is? There will be a variety of answers, none of which will be HIV. And so the gentle art, most likely they will call it malaria. The gentle art of questioning will get the correct answer. The questioning goes on, do you know what it's caused, and so on. And the team departs, having booked up another meeting, another community meeting in the next week or two. And these meetings go on to talk about how to look after someone with AIDS, how to wash their clothes, what is the best food to cook, what to expect as the disease progresses. In Uganda, our two fearless Salvation Army AIDS messengers went to a village to conduct a community meeting. At the end of the meeting, with the promise of coming back soon, they left the village. But the villagers kept on meeting after the Salvationists departed and decided that AIDS was caused through alcohol. So they imposed a ban on themselves that no one in the village was allowed to drink alcohol between the hours of 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. And the penalty, if caught, was to be carted off to the local constabulary. Now the local police were not pleased with this because they liked their drink. But this is what the community wanted. And so you can imagine the surprise and delight of the Salvationists when they returned for the next meeting and found out what had been decided by the villagers. Kibera slum is located 5 kilometres from Nairobi in Kenya. It is the biggest and poorest African slum with a population of up to 1 million. It has an estimated population density of 2,000 residents per hectare. Kibera is heavily polluted by human refuse, garbage, soot, dust and other wastes. The slum is contaminated with human and animal feces due to the open sewage system and the frequent use of flying toilets. The lack of sanitation combined with poor nutrition among the residents accounts for many illnesses and diseases. In this terrible place is the Salvation Army, the core that shines in the village. There's a nursery school and a very active HIV/AIDS program. The local community council members meet under a tree in the core grounds, as it is the only clean and decent place in the whole area. The HIV/AIDS team has been teaching throughout the slum, and as a result of this teaching, several of the makeshift alcohol bars have voluntarily closed down. There are many other stories of the HIV/AIDS teams throughout Kenya and indeed Africa. This program is designed and promoted by Australian Dr. Ian Campbell, serving the community through medical expertise, carried on by local Salvationists, serving the sick and dying in a professional and compassionate manner. Now, many of you know of Stella Bywaters. She was an Australian Salvation Army who was born in 1919 to a farming couple at Nil in a small village in western Victoria. Now, as a teenager, Stella's mother died, and Stella had to shoulder the duties of housekeeping and caring for 5 other children of the family, and eventually they all became Salvation Army officers. Much of her story centres on the years of her service, caring for needy people in troubled Uganda when Idi Amin was president. And often her life was in danger, and her sacrificial and devoted service was honoured with the Army's highest award, the Order of the Founder. When the military coup came in 1971, Stella had served almost 9 years in Uganda. She was already a personality, moving among all classes of people, with Europeans, Asians and well-to-do Africans interested in her work, while the poor and sick, as well as those in the Salvation Army, held her in respect and affection. One of her colleagues said of her that life in Uganda was hard. The military regime showed little capacity for economic management, and the economy of the country was devastated. Food was both scarce and expensive, and even the most common items, a reel of cotton, an electric fuse, a ballpoint pen, a box of envelopes, were quite unobtainable in the shops. Petrol was always scarce, and one had to chase from one petrol station to another to find one with supplies. The colleague said, "I've known Stella queue for 4 days running, all day, every day, for a tank full of petrol to enable her to keep her work going." From the time King Faisal of Saudi Arabia presented President Amin with a ceremonial sword to Muslamise Uganda, Christian churches suffered. The Anglicans and Roman Catholics, the biggest denominations and the biggest threat to Amin, were first to bear persecution. And because of her philanthropic work, Stella had been in favour with the President. Before the coup, Colonel Idi Amin with his wife and some of his children had attended her appointment, Friendship House, and stayed there for an hour. Then after the coup, when he became President, he invited Stella to a special luncheon at one of his residences. He chatted to Stella, listened to her account of the work she was doing, and thanked her for it. The Army had to cease operations after that time, but in August 1977, when it was back going again, the Ministry of Religious Affairs had, on behalf of the President, presented Stella with one of his top awards, the Independence Medal for Meritorious Service to Uganda. A month later, on a visit to Nairobi, Stella received the Queen's Jubilee Medal, presented to her by the Australian High Commissioner to Kenya. If you wish to read her story, Star in a Dark Sky, was written by Jessie Jenks, and I'm happy to lend my copy to anyone. It's an inspiring story. But why am I mentioning Stella Bywaters in today's meeting? It's because her last appointment before retirement was to the Tororo Children's Home in Uganda. Tororo is a small town, and she was the only white woman in the whole community. But here she was again to pour out her vast store of love on the children. And one of those little children was a girl called Sarah. She loved her mama Stella, and if you spoke to Sarah today and mentioned Stella's name, her eyes and her face would light up. Sarah grew up in the Salvation Army home and became a Salvation Army officer. She married an officer, and together they served in Kenya. Sarah worked in the executive office at THQ in Nairobi when I was there, and that's how I heard her story. I was able to visit Stella on one of my homeland furloughs and relay to her the greetings of Sarah and her husband, Moses. The story continues. Sarah and Moses Wandulu became the officer commanding in the Uganda Command in July 2007. And in 2013, they became the territorial leaders of the Malawi territory. An African child, nurtured by an Australian officer in the 70s, still sharing the love of God and still serving the African people. nil? Certainly can. A whole world of good, still continuing many years after Stella Bywater's was promoted to glory. And for many years to come, as Colonel Sarah Wanduru continues her service, touching the lives of people around her, sharing the love of God she first saw in Stella Bywater's. Can any good come out of here? A whole world of difference. It's still going on in Malawi. All our service is valuable to God. There are many ways in which each of us can serve others. If you're not too old, too incapacitated, too weak, too young, too strong, too poor, too unsure of yourself to help others. Your giving next week is also a great service, and whether you subscribe little or large, if it is given sacrificially according to your capacity, it becomes a service to God. Just think of the ongoing effect of the drought funding in 2001. In the first chapter of St John's Gospel, we see a lovely picture of people suddenly recognising Jesus for who he was, and then they introduce others to him. On being told that Jesus came from Nazareth, Nathanael sneered, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" In a later chapter of John, we find Nathanael still with the disciples after the resurrection of Jesus. He had been around when Jesus was on his earthly ministry. He had long ago acknowledged Jesus as the Son of God. He knew Jesus, the Jesus who made a whole world of difference. We do what we do. We are who we are. We serve whom we serve because of Jesus of Nazareth is our Saviour, the Son of God. Whether it be simple, gracious service like the manger in Guildhall, sustaining service like the drought relief, systematic service like the HIV/AIDS workers, or self-sacrificing service such as we see in Stella Bywater's, willingly and sacrificially offer your service to him and experience a whole world of difference. When we belong to Christ, we are not our own. We are his, and we're available. We sang in one of the songs before, we're available, we're ready, we're willing. We're going to sing a song, an old song that's quite well known, I think. Not my own, but saved by Jesus, who redeemed me by his blood. Gladly I accept the message. I belong to Christ the Lord, not my own. Saviour, I belong.